Hi, my name's Clayton and I work at City of Adelaide and I'm also a resident here. I'm excited to talk to the Lord Mayor today about our corporation and how it interacts with the community. That's the first question. When someone says the word council, people will think of it as either the corporation or the elected members or kind of a combination of the two. So I guess what are the key differences and overlaps of their roles?
Well, I always think of the council elected members as a board directing the work.
Mm-hmm.
We have no real control over what happens.
Yeah.
We just have to set the strategy. And the thing that's really important for councillors to understand is that if you just faff around and argue all the time, nothing happens. You actually have to have a strategy. You have to cost a project and you have to put it in the budget. Then something will actually happen. So I think that once you've done that, it's the administration's job to make sure they deliver. And you can put timelines and parameters in. You can put things in the KPIs of the CEO. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely dependent on the quality of the administration. You're absolutely dependent on the quality of the staff to deliver. And you have to show respect and courtesy to get anything done.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I'll keep that in mind. Well, I guess following that, being a capital city council, I'd imagine we have a lot more eyes on us from people outside of our jurisdiction compared to other councils throughout Greater Adelaide. So I know one big thing coming from the strategic plan from a corporation standpoint is the transparency policy, because I'd imagine we have to kind of set a standard for our conduct. So I was wondering what kind of information is going to be part of that transparency policy, and is it a more active or passive role?
Well, I think traditionally over the last 25 years the council has had a lot of discussions in confidence and has kept things secret, and that's been unpopular in the community. So we have to be as transparent as possible and not bury things, and we've had hundreds of things that have been buried in confidentiality. And over the last couple of years they've been going through that process of trying to bring them out of confidence. But I think for a capital city the issue is that you have an emotional significance that's beyond your power, and people across the whole metropolitan area believe they live in Adelaide. They do live in Greater Adelaide, but they also look to the council as the heart of the city, and it's a political heart, it's an institutional heart, it's an emotional heart. When something terrible happens, if there's a national crisis or a tragedy, you look towards the city for some kind of memorial or event or comment. So that I think our status is of almost a central emotional part of the city, but also the state, because we are a city-state and we are the biggest city in the state.
Yep.
And so everybody from Oodnadatta to Mount Gambier has a stake in our city, and that's why it's important that we behave properly. We are not just transparent, but we are courteous, we are well prepared, we are well organised, we are disciplined, and we deliver. And I think we have an obligation beyond that to our ratepayers. We have to do things to the highest standard. And I feel really strongly that one would want our capital city to be a role model for other parts of local government. It would be great if they looked to us as a place where new policy is developed and we could share it with them. It would be good if they could look to us as someone who developed ideas and then shared it across the state. And I don't feel so strongly about us losing great staff. If we can train and give someone a good career path and then they go on to be the CEO of another council, that's a win, because it means that we've done something good for the whole sector. So whilst I want to be an employer of choice, I recognise that if we give people a good experience and good training and they learn everything there is to learn and they take it somewhere else, well, that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does an organisation that is bold, aspirational and innovative look like to you?
Well, I've been critical of some councils in the past because they haven't achieved very much, and to me, getting on with the core business is really important. You can't actually be ambitious and audacious if you can't keep the potholes dealt with, if you can't manage the footpaths, if you're not timely with your approvals, if you don't have proper regulatory services, and if you don't fulfill your obligations under various acts. And so the first thing we have to do is make sure we comply. And we haven't always been on top of things, and so I've been really very keen to make sure our CLMPs are up to date, our asset management plans are up to date, our policies and strategies are up to date, and that's core business. That's the basic minimum. And when you can get that right, then you can go on to try things that are more audacious. I mean, in a way, just having a go at homelessness is pretty audacious. Having a go at refit and refurb to recycle old buildings is not, normal in councils, and we're trying to do something different and better. And every time we enact a policy that is beyond the norm, then I just think, well done, we've done something, and maybe we can help other councils. But the basis is we have to get the roads, the rates and the rubbish sorted. We have to do our core business. We have to treat our staff properly. We have to be good in customer service. We have to lift our game back of house so that then we can do imaginative things. Do you know, I love local government. It's really interesting because everybody hates councils. They're always moaning about the mayor, they're moaning about the council, they moan about the rules. There's a lot of moaning about councils around the world. I had a very good experience when I went to university, because in the old days in England, I got a grant from the local council that paid for my university fees and paid an allowance. They not only paid me, how old I am, £7 a week to live on, which was enough. At that stage, the return boat trip to Paris was £5. So £7 was pretty good. They gave me £80 to buy a skeleton and books because I was doing medicine. And the next year, I think they paid me £50 because books went on, but I had the skeleton. I loved my local council. They gave me a start in life. So I've always had fondness for local government. And that's why I like local government. It's the closest level to the public. Residents, their lives are affected every single day by what we do. Every single day, every business is affected. And that's why we have to be good with customer service. We have to be responsive and we have to be helpful. And that's basic. So I'm very supportive of local government.
Well, that does tie into one of the questions I had.
Was that
actually.
the question? Sorry.
Well, no, so one of the questions I did have was about kind of a inherent negativity towards council, because we can't always be on someone's side. There's a bit of, if it's citizen versus citizen or something.
Do you know, I have never been anywhere in the world where people haven't moaned about local government. So there's nothing unique.
Yeah, nothing unique to
I
Adelaide.
understand that.
Yeah.
And people, will like to complain, but we have to admit that sometimes we haven't always been on top of things. We have to admit that sometimes we've been a bit slack. We have sometimes not responded. We have sometimes been obscure and obtuse and evasive, and we have to do better. And that's what I mean about getting the basics right. And I think we can do that.
I'll make sure it happens.
We've got great staff. There are so many people working hard to get it right. We just have to support them and give them help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess with Adelaide, we want to be the economic centre of the state.
We are.
And we also want to be the most livable city in the state. So how do we strike a balance between, commercial interests and those of the residents?
That's a really interesting question, because everybody thinks that their cause is the important one. I have never yet met a decent human being who hasn't been keen on one sport that just wants to build one more building in the parklands. And everyone's decent, but they just think their idea is the best. I think the problem is that some people, when they're in the development industry, don't imagine what it would be like to be living next door to their development. You have to sometimes imagine what it would be like to be in someone else's shoes. And I think that sometimes you can have an insight into how people react by trying to imagine how you would react in their position. I understand that if you're in the development industry, you're there to make money. I understand that. And you're there to push the envelope, to get as much as you can. but I think that everyone has to respect residents and realise that if we don't have residents in the city, a lot of businesses will go under. We need the residents, and we want more of them to sustain coffee shops, restaurants and shops, and you have to be respectful of their needs. I've lived in the city for a long time, and I know how difficult it is when you have a house with a solar system and someone builds 14 stories at the bottom of your garden, takes your solar system down. I know what it's like when you live next door to something that's really noisy, and so I have more empathy for residents. But I've also run businesses in the city. I ran my practice in the city, and I knew what it was like to have issues with commercial rubbish collection and all the things that small businesses worry about, cash flow and other issues. So that it's sometimes just important that everyone takes a deep breath and thinks what the person on the other side of the argument's living through.
And I guess wrapping up then, how can young Adelaideans be better represented both through elected members and also within the corporation?
Well, I think that within the city generally, it's important to realise that some of the issues in the city are really important to young people. I always thought that with students voting on the roll, there were three things that they used that they wanted to preserve. And I've always said that one of them is the free bus, costs council $1 million a year. The other are our libraries, which are used intensively by young people often studying, and the other is the parklands for sport. So those are areas where we're probably spending must be close to 30 million a year of our budget, and that is directly focused on younger people on the whole. So there is a real interest. You have a vested interest in those, just that part of it, even before we get into the other areas. So the council does weird and wonderful things. We've had a project to make it safer for people to work in hospitality venues, because we've recognised that some of the sexual harassment and bullying. So we've put money into studies and work in that area. We've tried to make cities safe streets, again important for young people going out at night. But I don't think sometimes young people realise that council matters. They sometimes don't understand that so much of what we do impacts your lives. Because you know what we're up to. But the average young person doesn't have a particular interest. And so the first thing I'd say is think of the things you like about the city. Realise what your local council does in those spaces, what they've got their fingerprints on. And if you want those services to be retained or enhanced, you better vote.
Yeah, funny you say that, because I was not as interested in my local council before I got into development assessment.
Now you know.
I am now, yeah. And I know
But I
just
actually
how important it is.
the development assessment that we do is really sophisticated compared to other levels of government, and I think the CAP does a great job.
Thank you so much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, not at all. It's a pleasure to
Lovely
talk
meet
to you.